What you're about to hear is the first real cost update of this conflict, because the headlines just moved from speculation to American casualties and a widening retaliation map that is no longer confined to Israel and Iran. 3 U.S. service members are confirmed killed, and 5 are seriously wounded according to U.S. Central Command. That is the first publicly reported American death toll tied to this operation, and it changes everything, politically, militarily, and psychologically. Here's why this is different from your last video. Last time, the story was dominated by one massive headline: Iran's top leader being taken off the board. This time, the story is about the consequences that follow a decapitation strike, what it triggers, what it exposes, and what it forces the U.S. to own. Because once Americans are dying, this isn't just a foreign policy event. This becomes a domestic accountability event too. Stay with me, because in a few minutes I'm going to lay out the 3 things that matter most right now. 1. What we know about the casualties and what it tells us about Iran's reach. 2. What the conflict map looks like as retaliation spreads into the Gulf. 3. What Iran's transitional leadership actually means, and why that phrase can either signal stability or a power struggle. Quickly, if you want clean updates where I separate what's confirmed from what's claimed, hit subscribe. I'm going to keep this focused, skeptical, and evidence first. Let's start with what is confirmed. U.S. Central Command says 3 service members were killed in action, 5 were seriously wounded, and others suffered minor injuries like shrapnel wounds and concussions. Now here's the point. When a conflict produces U.S. fatalities, the entire strategic environment changes. The public tolerance changes, congressional pressure changes, Iran's calculation changes, and the odds of escalation rise. And here's the most important thing to understand about why this happened. Iran does not need to win a conventional war to create political leverage. Iran only needs to impose enough cost to pressure decision-makers, at home and abroad. That's why these casualties aren't just a tragic number, they're a signal, and that signal is aimed at Washington. Now I'm going to be careful here. We do not have every detail about exactly how those Americans were killed, but we do have the confirmed fact that they were killed during the ongoing military operations in this campaign. So here's the accountable framing. If the U.S. is executing sustained strikes and Iran is retaliating across the region, then U.S. forces become targets not only in one location, but across a broad footprint. And the conflict doesn't just widen geographically, it widens politically. Because now the question isn't only what are the objectives, it's how many Americans is the administration prepared to lose pursuing them? Now let's talk about the retaliation map, because this is where a lot of coverage gets chaotic. Here's the clean picture. Israel says it launched fresh strikes in the heart of Tehran. Iran mounts attacks on Israel and across the Persian Gulf. In other words, the theater is expanding. And the Washington Post reporting describes multiple Arab countries reporting missile attacks and ongoing strikes across the region. That matters, because it's not just Israel absorbing retaliation. It's countries that house U.S. assets and critical infrastructure, exactly the kind of pressure that can pull more actors into this conflict. Now layer in what CNN was reporting from the region. You had Iranian leadership figures vowing retaliation in very blunt terms. We will stab them in their heart. And Trump responding with threats of overwhelming force. That's not diplomacy language. That's escalation language. And CNN's coverage out of the Gulf included extraordinary numbers. The UAE describing interceptions of large volumes of missiles and drones, meaning the retaliation is not symbolic. It's persistent and heavy. Now here's the key. A widening retaliation map has 2 purposes. Purpose 1 is obvious. Impose pain. Purpose 2 is strategic. Isolate Israel, isolate the U.S., and force regional governments into difficult choices, whether to stay neutral, condemn Iran, support U.S. operations, or clamp down domestically to prevent unrest. When the Gulf gets hit, it becomes a regional crisis, not a bilateral conflict. Now, this is the new piece you can build an entire video around, because it wasn't central in your last one. Iran is operating under what is being described as a transitional phase. According to reporting, Iran's president, the judiciary chief, and a jurist from the Guardian Council are described as being in charge during this transitional period. That might sound like bureaucracy. But in systems like Iran's, transitions are where the real struggle happens. Here's why. A supreme leader isn't just a politician, He's the top legitimacy stamp. And when that stamp disappears, power doesn't just pass to the next person like a baton. Power gets negotiated between institutions, security forces, clerical networks, and whoever controls information. So when you hear transitional leadership, you should immediately ask, is this a stable interim council meant to prevent panic? Or is it a public-facing cover for behind-the-scenes competition, especially involving the Revolutionary Guard? Because here's the risk. Internal power uncertainty can produce external aggression. Why? Because factions prove strength by escalating. A power center might decide, if I hit harder externally, I look stronger internally. That's how you get retaliation that isn't strictly strategic. It's performative, and performative violence is unpredictable. Now let's talk about the strike details and what they imply about the strategy, because this is a major new info angle. According to reporting, the initial strike targeted a meeting of senior Iranian officials, and the strike was timed around intelligence that Khamenei would be present. That means the operation wasn't simply about degrading hardware. It was about breaking the chain of leadership. And the Washington Post reporting also describes a massive scale. U.S. Central Command saying the U.S. struck over 1,000 targets in Iran, targeting things like communications, command and control, missile installations, and naval assets. If that's accurate, you're not looking at a limited operation. You're looking at sustained high-volume pressure. Now connect the dots. If the U.S. is hitting that many targets, and Iran is retaliating across the region, you're in a cycle where each side is trying to dominate escalation. And here's the uncomfortable question that follows. What does success look like? Is success a ceasefire? Is success regime change? Is success a weakened IRGC? Is success a new leadership arrangement that's less hostile? Because if the goal isn't clearly defined, escalation becomes the default. And that's where nations drift into long conflicts. Not because they chose war, but because they didn't define the exit. Now I'm going to give you the next 72 hours checklist, the practical version, what viewers should watch for and what I'm watching for. First, watch whether retaliation continues hitting the Gulf and critical shipping lanes. The reason is simple. If shipping disruptions intensify, this becomes an economic story for Americans fast. Energy costs, market volatility, and pressure on political leadership. Second, watch whether Iran's transitional leadership produces unity or visible fractures. Unity looks like consistent messaging, rapid decisions, disciplined operations. Fracture looks like contradictory statements, sudden arrests, competing claims, and uneven retaliation patterns. Third, watch Washington's public posture, because there's a tension in the reporting right now. On one hand, there are signals that talking might happen with new leadership. On the other hand, there are signals the operation continues unabated. That gap matters because it tells you whether the U.S. thinks this ends with negotiation or ends with maximum pressure. And finally, watch domestic U.S. politics. With confirmed U.S. casualties, there will be pressure for congressional oversight, war powers debates, and demands for clarity on objectives. That's not a sideshow. That's the democratic check that decides how long conflicts last. Here's my conclusion. This update isn't the leader is dead. You already covered that. This update is, the conflict now has American fatalities, retaliation is widening, and Iran is attempting to hold itself together through a transitional structure under extreme pressure. The next move that matters most is not the loudest headline. It's whether this becomes managed escalation with an exit path or a widening regional conflict with no off-ramp. Comment your call. Does this stabilize through a transition, or does it spiral through fragmentation? And subscribe if you want the next update the moment new confirmed details drop.